and welcome once again to A Deeper Look. I'm Marty Wasserman. Is psychotherapy on the right track in dealing with the problems of the human mind? Some people say yes, but my guest today says no. My guest is Dr. James Hillman, who himself has practiced psychotherapy for some 35 years. He has just co-authored a new book called We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse. The book is published by HarperCollins. He says that most human problems are actually caused by the influence of an unhealthy society around us, and that psychiatrists should shift their focus from solving the internal problems of the individual to helping the individual solve the problems of the world around him. He says that the psychiatrist's office, in fact, should become a cell of revolution. Dr. Hillman studied personally with the famed Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. He is a Jungian psychologist. In fact, from 1959 to 1969, he was director of studies at the Jung Institute in Zurich. Dr. Hillman, welcome to the program.
I'm glad to be here.
What do you mean when you say that you want the psychiatrist's office to become a cell of revolution?
Well, I want us to stop thinking that our souls are only, or our minds are only inside our skins, and that the soul, there's also soul in the world, and that we begin to pay attention to soul beyond human beings.
Now, psychiatry is mostly the science of helping a person with his internal problems. If we start giving advice on how to solve the problems of the world around him, isn't that something totally different from psychotherapy?
Giving advice about how to solve the problems, yeah, that's very different. But giving advice isn't the point. It's a matter of getting a person sensitive to what's going on every day in the world around him. What's going on in his office, what's going on the highways, what's going on in the materials he deals with, not only what's going on in his human relationships.
Well, let's consider some of the possible reasons that people go to psychotherapists in the first place. Irrational anger, irrational fear. Maybe they can't make their relationships work. What if a person goes to a psychiatrist and says, I can't make my relationships work, they all break up after a short time? Are you going to convince him that this is the fault of society around him?
Well, what happens if we begin to think that how many dysfunctional families are there? They now say 90% of the families are dysfunctional. How many people are divorced? How many people's relationships don't work? Just in your own life, how many people do you know whose relationships work? So maybe there's a collective level to what's going on, something beyond you and me, or me and my wife, or me and my son. There's something in the collective psyche, in the soul of the world, at a level beyond personal solutions.
Let's say a person has a problem, for example, with personal relationships. I can see the benefit in showing him that he's not the only person with this problem. There are many people who have similar problems, but still you have the problem of what do you do about it? Are you advocating something to be done about it?
Well, I'd say in somewhere in the 100 years of psychotherapy and the world's getting worse, that instead of the couple looking into each other's eyes, trapped in their room, in their condo and fighting it out, they also need to stand side by side and fight the world. So it's not only you trying to solve my loneliness in my relationship, but realizing my loneliness is part of a political, social, and economic situation. So I've got a lot to do with the abuses that are put on me from the world, not only the abuses that are put on me by my spouse or my father and my mother.
When you say fight the world, that sort of implies a degree of alienation, like the world is your enemy. You might have said, we have to learn to cooperate with the world.
Oh, yeah, fine. But I was just thinking that the two people are fighting each other, whereas they stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, the fight could then be towards the corruptions and pollutions and intoxications and abuses that are going on in the world. That's what I mean partly by the cell of revolution. So that psychotherapy would make you more sensitive to what's going on immediately in your life rather than what happened to you 40 years ago.
Well, let's say it did that. Still you have the issue of what are you going to do about it then?
You always have that issue. Every citizen has that issue. What are you going to do about it? But at least you're not going to try to solve it through interiorization and saying it's really my problem and my hostility and my anger and my father and so on. You're beginning to realize it's also the fact that I was sold a lemon of a car and that I've been cheated on the S&L loans and I have been, and so on and so forth. So there's a kind of an awareness to what goes on every day that makes me angry.
Are you saying that all human problems are basically caused by external factors, or are there still some problems which really are internal?
Of course there are, but I think psychotherapy has spent 100 years working over those internal things so that the whole culture feels that whatever happens is somehow me. It's somehow my fault. I ought to work on this further. I ought to work on this either in terms of my growth or in terms of what I should do about it inside myself, my hostility or whatever.
Your book is called We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse. Does that imply that psychotherapy is making the world worse?
Well, you know, that "and" is the tricky little thing in the title. Because the
You
"and"
could have
could
said
mean,
but
the world's getting
But you
worse,
said "and."
or therefore the world's getting worse. There are a lot of ways that could have been. All we do is suggest that there's one thing been happening for 100 years and also another thing. What's the relation? Is it possible that the more we internalize, the more we neglect the political world?
Do you do clinical treatment anymore? Do you still treat patients?
I worked with people up to about 3 years ago, and then I'm on a long-term sabbatical.
Would you say that you're conducting research of some kind?
No, I'm doing therapy in a different way. I'm doing a kind of therapy of ideas, what goes on in people's minds, the collective ideas that dominate the culture, like the idea of growth and personal journey and my own self and so on, working that out in many ways. For example, I work with men, and I'm going next week up to Mendocino to work for a week with men in the woods.
Now, who's your co-author on this book? You co-authored it with Michael Ventura. Who is he and what's his connection with the project?
Well, Michael Ventura is a writer, first of all, for the LA Weekly, a film writer, novelist, and interviewer. And he started the book with an idea of interviewing me about psychotherapy. And from that, we developed this extraordinary conversation back and forth. So the whole book is dialogue and letters back and forth between us. Two guys letting it rip. And it's really a book of radical ideas that are not just what's wrong with psychotherapy, with what's going on in the culture, and why are we so locked into our individualism?
Well, when you say locked into our individualism, what do you mean by that? Are you thinking of man against the state, man as a helpless victim of, quote, society, which is really just a bunch of other human beings? I mean, what's your image of your relationship with the rest of the world? Or
I think I am the rest of the world. The culture is me. My reactions are the reactions of others. I think we've lived for 100 years with an idea of a self-enclosed individual, with this idea of a self somewhere buried inside me. And I think that the self is more the interiorization of community, that I am myself when I'm talking to you. That's as much me as I am when I'm locked up in a room thinking.
do you think it might be useful to view all of society itself as a psychiatric patient and try to
Sure.
diagnose society's psychiatric problems?
And that's not new. Freud was doing that. But not just society. Buildings, food, light, rooms, furniture, highways, bridges, the environment that we live in is, you know, they're anorexic buildings that are completely tall and skinny and glass, and the inside's all hollowed out. And there are paranoid banks where you go up 3 stories before you can meet anybody. And everything is held out and kept off, and the entry's full of security systems. And so, in other words, the diseases that we put only into people are also in architecture, they're in systems, they're in schools, they're everywhere.
So everything human beings do reflects their state of mind.
In a way, yes.
What would you say are the most pressing psychiatric problems of society as a whole, the ones that need fixing the most?
Anesthesia. Robert J. Lifton calls it psychic numbing. The fact that we are anesthetic, or numbed, so that we don't react. We are not outraged. 150,000 Iraqis, perhaps mostly children or young people, were bombed and destroyed. It's not that the government doesn't tell us this fact. It's that nobody even asks this fact. That's anesthesia.
Would it be healthier if everybody was very sensitized
Yes,
to that?
absolutely.
Many people consider it healthier to desensitize yourself in the face of pain. It hurts a lot less.
It hurts a lot less. That's called denial. So we live a culture of denial. And then
Well-
we can perpetrate terrible horrors from Salvador to Panama to Iraq to the homeless to anything because we don't want to feel it.
Now, we not only live in one culture ourselves, say United States of America, But we also live in the world, and in the world there are many nations that are hostile to each other, many nations that don't care if they cause harm to others as long as they fulfill their personal ambitions. Is that a kind of psychiatric problem that needs to be addressed?
The kind of heroic individual egoism, sort of me first?
Well, in some places, the me-first attitude is glorified. The toughest guy, the most ruthless conqueror, the guy who gets his picture on the coins and all that, the guy who has his face everywhere, he is the most famous and everyone looks up to him. Does he represent a manifestation of a psychological aberration?
I would think
in society?
so. I would think that's the heroic ego gone wild, the heroic dictator figure, and that's certainly a dominant archetype in the psyche. We all suffer from that. Our culture suffers from that.
Is it a matter of degree, though? For an individual, like if an individual does not have enough ego, he's considered too weak. If he doesn't have enough ambition, enough drive, if he doesn't go out there every day and compete in the world, he's considered a loser. But if he competes too much and is too ruthless, then everybody hates him. Is there some midpoint?
I'm not sure. See, that's all put... I'm not sure that the culture today requires this competitive, out-there guy. I'm not sure about that. There's a lot of thinking among feminists, a lot of thinking in psychotherapy that sensitivity is perhaps the most important quality of a human being, rather than willful action. Receptivity, noticing noticing what the hell is going on.
Some people feel...
And reacting, and then responding to that.
Some people feel that our popular culture is one of the leading causes of desensitivity. It's saturated with images of sex and violence, of treating people like objects. Do you think that our mass culture is one of the causes of some of the psychological problems people have today?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because the mass culture is always yes. You know, if I say yes, then it's dealt with. But there are all kinds of virtues and values in the mass culture. It's a question of noticing and picking what's going on, seeing it more carefully. Of course, if you're boomed out of your mind with sound that's too loud or other things like that, you can't notice. That's a form of anesthesia. We do live manic. We do live very fast. But still, I don't want to just lay it on mass culture. It's too easy.
Well, if you look at movies and rock music and television shows...
There's all kinds of great stuff in the movies.
Yeah,
There's all kinds of great words in the songs. It's probably a question of slowing it down.
Well, let's say that we're assuming that some problems that people have are caused by the influence of society around them, and the influence of society includes what they see and hear from whatever source. How would you know what to do about that? For example, some people might say it would contribute to the mental health of society if certain types of expression were suppressed.
Oh, yeah, that's
Others
plenty
would
of that.
say, just let it all out. The healthiest thing is to just let everything be expressed.
Yeah, so...
I mean, how could you begin to determine which would be healthier? If you
You're
were diagnosing...
You're raising the basic question of a democratic society, and does it have censorship? And who's going to do the censoring? Now, if sensitivity is the main focus of education, then you will have more and more sensitive decisions made by individual people and by the society. But if information is the main focus of an education, you're not going to be sensitive. Everything becomes information. Then somebody else has to do the censoring. But you have an internal censor. You know you don't like this and you do like that. You do know that some of the foods you ate as a kid you no longer want to eat. Some things are too sweet now that weren't too sweet when you were 14. There is an internal taste mechanism that decides lots of things if you give it a chance.
This is Marty Wasserman on A Deeper Look, and my guest today is Dr. James Hillman, Jungian psychologist, studied personally with Jung, was director of studies of the Jung Institute for 10 years. We're talking about his new book, We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse. Now, Dr. Hillman, let's talk about some of the typical problems that people go to psychotherapists for. Irrational fears. A person can't stand to be in a crowded room. He has to leave immediately. And this could be dysfunctional because maybe his occupation requires that he be in crowded rooms. Now, how would you apply your paradigm of viewing a person's problems as caused by society around him? How would you begin to deal with that type of issue?
There are many rooms that I want to get out of as fast as I can.
Hopefully this isn't one of them right here.
And Norman Mailer has a lovely little piece in one of his books, I think it's An American Dream, where at the beginning of he goes to a party and he suddenly, the hero in the book suddenly says, I got to get out of here, I'm getting cancer. So, to begin with, your symptoms are telling you something. They're not just to be got rid of so that you can adapt and get on with the world. That's one thing. One of the main things you do in psychotherapy is show respect for the symptom. The symptom is part of a person's soul and is trying to say something. So you've got to listen to what the symptom's doing. That's very important. So that's number one. So if the person's got this agoraphobia and can't go out or can't stay in, or claustrophobia, whatever, there's some reason going on in that. It's not just dysfunctional.
Right, but is that strictly an internal problem? I mean, when a person goes to a psychiatrist and decides to spend whatever it costs these days, it's generally because they're in pain or because they have some dysfunction which is hampering their life.
Indeed,
and they're
right.
not necessarily interested in analyzing their whole life. They just want to remove that problem.
Of course, and they can very well go to behavior therapy, and there are many ways of crisis intervention. There are many kinds of therapies which will work on, or even pharmaceuticals that will work on removing that symptom. No question.
But could you take that symptom and tell the person that the reason you have this fear of crowds is really something external? It's something that society has programmed into you, and you have to look for the solution in society.
No, it isn't a matter of either inner or outer. There are all kinds of therapies and all kinds of reasons that people have this or that symptom. The book is not talking about that. Let's not get astray from what the book's The book is talking about the dominant notion that whatever goes wrong is somehow part of me and that I have to work on me about it. If I'm angry because I've been on the San Mateo Bridge or something, and these great trucks go by, and by the time I get to the therapist's office, I'm afraid and sweating and nervous, and the therapist wants to talk about my anger and rage, pretty soon, usually, we're not talking about the trucks. We're talking about big guys who are bigger than me and have bigger dicks than I have, or we're talking about my vulnerability, or we're talking about my father or I always wanted to be strong in a truck driver. We're moving away from what actually happened to some internal something. We're inside me, and we've left the bridge, we've left the trucks, we've left the world. That's what this book's about. It's about how to restore psychotherapeutic thinking to the world so that we think about that as well as what's going on in my feeling life, and that the feeling life be connected to the world, not only about me.
Well, there are many people who have similar experiences. There are thousands of people who fight the traffic every morning, and some of them get extremely aggravated by it, and others kind of dismiss it like it's nothing, this is the standard routine. So it doesn't seem to me like the influence of society alone causes a person's problems.
Of course not. Everyone reacts differently.
Some people are more vulnerable. Some people take it worse than
or
others.
Or some people may have turned off the problem completely and anesthetized themselves to it.
Now, you're saying that psychiatry as practiced today is somewhat obsolete, that the methods and paradigms and theories that it uses cannot really solve most of the problems that people want solved.
I don't think we say that in the book. No. We're talking, again, not about what's wrong with psychiatry or First of all, we're talking about psychotherapy, not psychiatry, but psychotherapy. We're talking about the self-satisfied feeling that therapists have that they're doing the good work of making people alive in a world which is full of bad stuff. And I'm saying that concentration on it, or we are saying, Ventura and I, that we're saying the concentration on yourself is part of the neglect of the world. Part of the reason the forests are going down and the rivers and the fish are going belly up. And it's more important about those rivers and those fish than about you and your relationship to your son and your daughter, maybe, or your husband or your wife or your mother and your father. In other words, the concentration on personal relationships has narrowed the focus of the citizen to being a patient, a victim, a survivor, instead of being a citizen.
There's some implication of political activism here.
I
like
think
you're
there is.
urging people to go out and get involved in whatever cause they think is
They
gonna
already
accomplish
are
something.
involved. Their anger is telling them they're involved. They don't need to go out. They just need to listen to their anger and not internalize it to such an extent.
Now, what do you think? I mean, our society has huge problems, obviously. If you look at our popular culture, you look at the statements of our politicians, everyone is trying to satisfy their greed as much as possible.
We had a lot of years of that now.
The people who are not greedy don't fight as hard for money, and so they don't make as much of it. You have a certain trade-off there. Even if we accept the prospect that most of our problems are caused by the world around us, do we really have any clear path as far as knowing what to do about it? You know, some people say that the people who cause the most problems in the world are the ones who are trying to make things better.
Oh, yeah.
That might sound
Very
cynical, but
very true.
it's not enough to want to change society. You have to know what you're doing.
I don't think it's the job of the psychologist to have a program. The job of the psychologist is to wake people up. Ever since Socrates, it's been that way. And Aristotle said man is by nature a political animal. A political animal. So that means the person who walks into the therapist's office is first of all a citizen and then a patient. And if you're not performing your citizen jobs, or you're not living your citizen life, you're going to be sick if you're first of all a political animal.
It sounds in a way that you're urging people to take more responsibility for what
Yes.
goes on around them,
Yes.
not simply be a passive victim.
Yeah. I think the whole notion of being a victim and a survivor is, or a child, an abused child, or an adult child, or the child of adult children, or whatever the recovery names are, is all saying the same thing. I'm focused on my inner child, and therefore I don't vote because this thing is bigger than me. What voice is saying this thing is bigger than me? Only I can't do much about it. That's a child speaking. And we have infantilized our culture with this therapeutic stuff about the inner child.
Do you think that the type of psychotherapy that is usually practiced is a little too self-indulgent in that it tells the individual that whatever he does is basically okay?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, you want him to express his feelings, you want him to let it out in psychotherapy, but is there a standard of judgment, a standard of right and wrong? Does a person go to a psychiatrist and hear, well, the reason your life is a mess is that you're doing bad things, you have to stop doing those bad things?
Depends on the kind of therapy. A lot has to do with whether you're thinking communally or individually first. And in our culture, especially in the last 100 years since the 19th century, and the heyday of individualism, we think of the me first. We don't think of the community first. Once you begin to shift a little bit, is what I'm doing and thinking and feeling good for the community, or a community, whatever community it is, you will think differently.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, weighing the trade-offs between taking the me-first individualistic attitude or taking the society-first communal attitude. Do you feel that people need to sacrifice some self-interest, or do you feel that they will accept communalism only if they feel that they're also benefiting personally? Like, I pay my taxes because I don't feel like going to jail. If I were confident that I wouldn't go to jail, maybe I'd think twice, about paying taxes.
Right.
Does
Well,
that-
of course, does paying taxes, are your taxes used communally, or are they used for fomenting civil war in Central America? You see, that's part of the problem. It's very hard to be communal. It's very hard to be communal if you feel you're being ripped off by your taxes.
Or should I donate a lot of money to charity? And whenever you give money to somebody else, you don't control how it's going to be used. Some of it might be used for things you don't approve
It's not,
of.
you see, I think you're asking, what do you do? And I'm trying to say, how do you think? If I begin to think more communally, the actions will flow from that. It's not, you don't start with, at least I don't feel you should start with, I should do this or that. That's a program. I don't have a program. I'm more interested in a therapy of thought, a therapy of ideas. And that's what the book tries to do. 100 years of psychotherapy, and the world's getting worse, is a survey of the ideas that penetrate all through the culture that are therapeutic ideas and that need to be re-examined.
Let's say a person decides that the reason their life is in bad shape is because the government is falling apart, it's spent all the money, we're in debt, services are falling apart.
And we have
Now-
dishonesty in front of us constantly, that the leaders of the culture are men who are not leaders. How does that make you feel every day?
But
What
you're-
does that do for your children?
But should a person take that on? I mean, if a person takes that on and decides to make an issue of it or start a crusade about it, they're going to incur a very heavy cost. I guess the question is, should you tell a person that they ought to go and sacrifice themselves and risk everything they've got to fight something that they might not be able to make a dent in?
Of course you do. Of course. You fight not because you're going to win, you fight because there is something to live for that is important. Or go to therapy and talk about it.
So do you feel that...
And pay that bill.
Well, that's pretty expensive, too. But it might not be expensive as...
Listen, life costs money. Life costs pain. But being a citizen means you're involved with it, and there's no way out.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're beginning with a rebellious attitude, like if something doesn't work, just tear the thing down and fix it
there's
somehow.
nothing about tearing down. The thing is already crumbling. We don't have to tear it down. As Ventura says in the book, we're living in an avalanche. One of the other metaphors we have is we're on the Titanic and the ship is going down. Do you fix the plumbing while the ship is going down? What is therapy to do when the ship is going down, assuming that the world is getting worse? And if the ship is going down, what is the task of the individual? And we take that all up in the book.
Maybe rush to the lifeboats?
Well, is therapy a lifeboat?
Aside.
Is therapy a lifeboat?
I guess that's a questionable issue. Some people might find it so.
See, if you place your own suffering within the context of the world's suffering, and you place your own marriage within the context of the dysfunction of families and lives and men and women and all the rest that's going on, you get another view of it, and you get a little more heart comes into it, and you're not quite as self-centered.
In your view of things, when you look at politicians who are corrupt and various people who you think are doing harmful things to others, do you still see them as other human beings who are dealing with the same issues that we're all dealing with, or do you see them as some kind of alien other?
No, I see them as having more responsibility because they have more authority, or more power. Not necessarily authority, but they have more power. Therefore, I expect more of them.
And is there anything that... it seems to me that we elect politicians who are quite a bit like ourselves. Maybe most of us cut little corners in our daily lives. The politicians cut bigger corners because they have bigger corners to cut. You think that the people who lead us are really all that much different from most of the rest of us?
I think if they ask for our vote, then they are responsible to think more profoundly, have more vision, have more suggestions and programs. Yes, that's their job. That's why they're running for office.
Dr. Hillman, we're going to have to close on that note because I've gotten the signal. We're just about out of time. I've been speaking with Dr. James Hillman, co-author of the new book, We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse. It's published by HarperCollins, and I'd like to thank you very much for being here today and for an interesting half hour.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
And thank you for listening. And if you in the audience would care to contribute any ideas for programs that you may have, we're always interested in doing programs which are on topics that are important to our audience members. You can write to us, and you can write to me directly, Marty Wasserman, radio station KCSM, 1700 West Hillsdale Boulevard, San Mateo, California, 94402. We'd love to hear from you. For a deeper look, I'm Marty Wasserman, and we'll see you at the same time next week. Have a good day.